Thank you for the opportunity to allow NRP to host a session on risk-informed public investment in Bangladesh. And I am Nurul Nahar, working as Joint Chief in Program Division of Bangladesh Planning Commission. And so in today's session, in my presentation, I would just like to inform what we are doing to achieve risk-informed public investment and how we can integrate the risk informations and data knowledge in our planning process, and to achieve that, what kind of tools we have formulated through the National Resilience Program that we are implementing with the technical support of UNDP. So I will give a brief presentation on the tools. My next slide, just to have the background why I'm to justify or to learn, to the background of why we need such tools, because we know Bangladesh is a very vulnerable country to the disasters, all the hazards strike in Bangladesh. So we can say Bangladesh is as a hazardscape, and we have various data on how all the hazards that are identified in our standing orders on disaster have been impacting Bangladesh over the years, like our flash flood, cyclones, even landslides, storm surge, drought. Even we are very prone to earthquake, and also riverbank erosion is one of a very hazard that we need to reckon with. And globally, Bangladesh is known as, and of course, a vulnerable country. And recent publication shows that in a ranking that it is 7th out of the 10 most vulnerable countries in terms of the climate risk, which was published by German Watch last year. And this is a publication. We know that it is a yearly publication, and Bangladesh is always in the top 10 countries. So this shows that we cannot take the importance of disaster risk reduction and the disaster management less important for our resilient development. And so in this background, Planning Commission is implementing the National Resilience Program. It is a technical assistance project implemented by 4 ministries, including Planning Commission, Minister of Disaster Management and Relief, Minister of Women Affairs and Children, and Local Government Division, with the technical support from UNDP, UNOPS, and UN Women. It is a coordinated approach to achieve resilient development of the country, and with a gender and inclusivity lens. And in this integrated approach, the programming division's objective is to improve the capacities for gender responsive and risk-informed development planning. Because Planning Commission, we are formulating the 5-year plans, and in accordance with the 5-year plans, we are doing the annual development programs, as you know, which we do as a part of the national budget, and also the revised annual development program. And so now coming to directly to what we have developed, formulated to mainstream the disaster risk information in our planning system. And another information I would like to share at the policy level. So it's not just the hazard background of the country, but what are the policy directions that led to the development of the tools? I will share 2 slides. National Disaster Management Council in 2015 gave the direction that whether similar to environmental impact assessment, there can be a disaster impact assessment in our development planning, and this can be done by Planning Commission or concerned or Planning Ministry and concerned divisions. And later it was also mentioned in the meeting of the NDMC in 2017. So this is a very top level decision, and this committee is chaired by Honorable Prime Minister. And we also know our tool for the our disaster management system. The guiding tool, the most important document is the SOD, which has been updated in 2009, and it gives all the ministry division the roadmap of who will do what and when. And even in that tool, so it also recognized that planning, there will be a tool to achieve gender responsive, disability inclusive, and risk informed development in the country, and Minister of Planning will be responsible for such activities. And also the National Plan for Disaster Management, developed by the Ministry of Disaster Management Relief, that is the second plan that is at current existing, also identified Planning Commission, Planning Division as a principal implementer of a tool called the Disaster Impact Assessment. As you can see, we are now going to mention it as DIA. And another policy directive was from, as I mentioned, in the National Plan for Disaster Management. Also in our 8th five-year plan, the overarching national development plan, which is now under implementation, and it is from 2020 to 2025. And there also it stipulates that we need to develop guidelines on the DIA, and also promote not just the public sector investment, resilient public sector investment, but also we need to do some activities for the private sector resilience. So some activities like supply chain resilience, business continuity plan, risk profile, were recognized as important tools that could promote the resilient private sector in Bangladesh. So you can see the 8th five-year plan here. And so these are the, I just mentioned the national level, the macro level plans, but then now I would like to mention how when we do the development project planning and to implement the plan, because the plan is implemented through the ministry's divisions, through their programs, policies, and projects. So if we have to implement a project, so the total number of projects gives us the total public investment in Bangladesh. So for any project, we need a feasibility study. Through a proper feasibility study, we can design a good project and implement it on time with the proper utilization of the resources. So in the feasibility format, we introduce through our planning division, our NEC, National Economic Council, and ECNEC wing in 2021, that there has to be a feasibility study, and the format has been made comprehensive and for all. So there is a guideline on what will be the report on the feasibility study. And in that feasibility, there will be a section on environmental sustainability, climate resilience, and disaster risk analysis. So that is made a common part of the feasibility template. So this is a very, very important achievement in our planning, project planning system. And also we have introduced the assessment of disaster resilience of the project, and how we can do that. There are some small guidelines there, so that any ministry, when they do the feasibility study before for a project, they can, the third party contractor, the firm who does the feasibility, can look into these points and do the analysis on the climate change and disaster risks for the project. So now I come to what is the DIA tool? So the Disaster Impact Assessment tool, known as DIA, is actually going to support our project document. You know that government project document is called DPP. That is the development project pro forma, and in it there is a section called 24.3 and 31, which has the component of risks. So in 24.3 it has the issues of climate change and future disasters, but so far before we did not have a detailed guidelines on how to analyze the climate change issues and the disaster issues on the projects or on organization. But now through the DIA, this is a guideline to get the information for this section, these sections, and also for the whole DPP. We can get the information for disaster risk reduction measures, the costing, and overall to know we can also attempt to make it kind of risk proof as far as possible. So it is an ex ante tool that we will use it before finalizing the project document, not after. So it's a ex ante tool, and in many countries such tools are being implemented. And for example, JICA has a very a good guideline on that. And and also it is not just for the DPP. You will see all the list of DPPs in our annual development programs, and we're also in the news when Honorable Prime Minister approves the projects in the ECNEC meeting. So the projects are the DPPs that are being approved. So this DIA is also a mainstreaming tool. So the mainstreaming of what? Mainstreaming of disaster risk in a national planning process. We know we have very standard definitions of the mainstreaming of disasters by UNDRR, and Bangladesh government follows those definitions. So it's integrating knowledge and information on all potential disasters in the process of risk-informed planning. And this tool, through practicing such tool, it will also provide the base for national level disaster and climate risk assessment of the public and private investment in Bangladesh. So if you have from now all the projects considering the disaster risk reduction issues and the costing the resource need, then we will have a in a macro level picture of our need for our risk-informed public investment. So objective is to understand whether the proposed project of an organization will be threatened or affected by the existing hazards in development. So these hazards are mentioned in our SODs. For example, floods, landslide. There are more than 10 hazards identified. It could be storm surge, river erosion, and so on. And whether the project itself can increase intensity, frequency, and extent of existing disaster risk. It will also allow the project designer, developer to understand if the project will generate new threat or risk in development sites, and especially in the sites where there were no disasters in the past, because we know that development itself can create new risks for disaster. And also, but we need development. And if you have a gap in the development in our infrastructures and investment, the gap itself may lead to some disaster risk. And on the other hand, disaster itself hampers our development. So this research cycle, we have to have a proper understanding. Secondly, this tool will suggest appropriate actions, also countermeasures. We are saying here countermeasures that would be required at each stage of the project formulation, appraisal, and implementation. So these are very important points. So in the project cycle, we have the project identification, then formulation, then appraisal, then implementation, monitoring. So in the full cycle, this tool will really be helpful. It is a very simple tool, so it does not need new analysis, new data. So the current data that is existing in related to hazards can be accumulated, gathered, and this analysis for the DI can be accomplished. And in the scope of the DI, the framework is that a limitation is that it is only for the project level. So the project means a time-bound activity. It has a start and an end to achieve some objective of the organization, to give service for the public or some assets for the public and the country. So it is at the project level and mainly for the infrastructure projects, because in Bangladesh, in our ADP, if you look at the ADP, at least more than 50% of the allocation goes to the, implementing various kinds of infrastructures like our transports. That includes our roads, bridges, even the telecommunication, and also our health infrastructure, education infrastructure, and we have the power sector, and also very important buildings of the government that are, needed. New buildings are needed every year, and also operation and maintenance. And it considers a service, what that's infrastructure project, what kind of service it is providing to who are the stakeholders. And it considers the hazards, not just one hazard, multiple hazards. And it tries to also to consider the gender vulnerability, because the impact of a hazard, it has variability when in the gender. Women and men are affected differently. So it tries also to have a gender lens in the assessment. Yes, so it has 6 steps. Very simply, as I said, it's a simple and comprehensive tool. 6 steps. The first step is to identify the project in a map. So that means in this, for the DI, we need a map. So this map is a hazard map. Planning Commission has developed an atlas to the support previous TA project with the support of ADP. So the hazard maps are of 11 hazards are there, and the risks of the hazards are there. So the first step would be to identify the location of the project, and then identify the impacts, what kind of impacts are there from high to low. And so once we identify the impacts of the hazard, we try to identify the countermeasures to mitigate the impact. So there will be a list of countermeasures that the organization may need to identify to mitigate the hazard, and assess how it will be develop the countermeasure, and what will be the cost, and whether it is doable, and how even the countermeasure, whether it will be sustainable. So it's a very big point in the 6 steps assessment of the resilience. And after that, we will the organization will do the costing of the DRR, the disaster risk reduction. And the costing will be based on the available cost of the activities materials, and also whether the current DRR practices undertaken by other organizations. So based on all these, an estimate will be there, and that estimate will be included in the DPP, in the developed project pro forma. And also, it's not just the DRR, but we know that not all risks can be mitigated. There will be residual risks. So this is a very important thing, and those who are working with the disaster management knows about this term. So we will like to see in the assessment that there will be a report on the residual risk and how they can communicate with the stakeholder, like what can be the risks that might happen later on. Okay. So as I mentioned, so these are in a, just I want to show the hazard map and then go to another tool. So the hazard map will probably look like this, and this map is on cyclones, and you will I will request our planning expert Jayed Bhai to post the link of the ADP Atlas in the chat box so that all our viewers can download it. And this is just a map on the cyclone, red meaning very high and the green meaning low, and district wise. The limitation is it's based on administrative area of the district. Now Planning Commission will attempt to make it up to the Upazila level. And after that, we identify the hazard. We Then, as I mentioned, we then identify the impacts of the hazard. That can be both how the hazard will impact the proposed development project, I mean the outputs of the project, and whether the impacts of the proposed project itself will aggravate a hazard. And we have to identify the countermeasures, like to address the hazard as well as to address the vulnerability in that area. Then I go to the assessment of resilience. So here there will be an emergency management plan, a service continuity plan. Also, we have to understand the time for recovery, like after disaster strikes. The service will be disrupted, but then what time the service can be continued. So that kind of assessment will be given here. And this is the most important difficult part, is the costing of the DRR, because that will actually define the risk-informed project, the size of the project. And so after we have to determine the cost of the DRR, I mean, after selecting the best option, there may be different options. After selecting the best option of the DRR, we have to have that cost and, understand how much is it of the total cost of the project, and also cost per unit and things like that. So this will give information for the policymakers, the DPP reviewers or appraisers in Planning Commission. So whether the cost of DRR outweighs the total cost of the project. So that means through the cost of the DRR, a certain benefit will be achieved, and whether it is worthwhile to have the DRR at the beginning rather than having it later on, or rather than doing something later after the project is implemented. So this is very important, to have all these things in the assessment and incorporating it into our DPP. And then, as I mentioned, it will report the residual risk, that is the risk remaining after implementation of all DRR measures, and whether it is acceptable to the stakeholders in the project area, and also how it will be communicated to the beneficiaries, both men, women, and the people who will benefit from the project. Now, I would like to then go to another tool. So I just mentioned disaster impact assessment, but this assessment would need information, and these informations are available in Bangladesh through the various departments of the government. So as I mentioned, if you have noted that we don't need to generate new data when we do a feasibility or do a new survey, we can have this assessment with the given information data maps of the various departments. The problem is that all these data are lying with our departments. So at least 14 organizations of the government have these climate and disaster risk related data. So we have already developed the hazard maps from those organizations. So I've just mentioned a few, like Bangladesh Meteorological Department, Department of Disaster Management, Department of Agriculture Extension, LGED, Water Development Board, Soil Research Institute, and WARPO, and BADC, many more. So at least 14 organizations we have identified that have these risk related data. And they're also continuously updating through their surveys, through their own studies. And also we have these Survey of Bangladesh, they have very excellent maps. And so, but having them in different places does not help a project implementer. We need it in one place. That's why we developed their platform. Platform means everything together in one place, and having a very good accessibility. So we are calling this climate and disaster and climate risk information platform. Before it was digital. Now we have renamed it as Disaster and Climate Risk Information Platform, or DRIP. So this is the web-based platform. You can right now click here, drip.plancom.gov.bd, and you may have a look at what is in there. So there are like 6 drop-down menus there, and through there we can input the information of the projects, and there are some guiding questions how to do the DIA, and the project developer will give the informations there, and also identify the location on the hazard maps, identify the identify the risk. The risk will be generated through this platform. What we have to do, properly identify the location and select the hazard that might impact the project. So as I said, it is an integration of information. It is a common platform, all government departments. So far, it is only open to government departments through, we will have the password system. And the basic idea is to assist the officials who are doing the DPP to generate a report on the disaster impact assessment and include it in the DPP. So this DRIP has been already launched formally by Honorable Planning Minister on February 2nd. And not only that, it is also for following a data ecosystem approach. This is very important. So it is not a standalone item. It is integrated with the current ADP system. I think I have mentioned the term ADP a few times, Annual Development Program. That is ADP. So we are not doing it totally in a very fully automated way. So the ADP you can see on the website is fully automated, and also the printing of the document is through that system. So now we have the RADP of 2021, fiscal year 2021-22. So that system, web-based system, is called AMS. AMS, if you go to Planning Division's website, if those are interested, might have a look. So this DRIP is already linked to that system, because the DRIP will give information at the project level and also on the national level in terms like the district level, the hazard data. So it will also help the overall ADP exercise, because ADP, although we are doing it for the ministries and organizations, these projects are distributed all over the country. 64 districts right now. I think we have at least 1,200 projects in currently under implementation all over the country. So it will give an assessment like, so which hazards are mostly important to these projects, and the distribution of the projects in terms of hazards, in terms of districts, and so on. This is the map that I was talking about. So this is the atlas. I would like you to have a look, and it has the formula there. So I will be brief. And Noor, may I know how much more I have? Hello?
5 minutes.
Okay. So dear viewers, you know this formula from the IPPC 4th assessment. Now we have the, sorry, 5th assessment. Now we have the 6th assessment. So basically that risk definition, as I have mentioned several times, it is a function of the vulnerability, exposure, and the impact of the hazard. That gives our risk factor. So this is like a formula here, and some people have the capacity integrated. Here we have integrated the capacity here in the vulnerability, and we have given the quotient not 1, 0.7 to exposure, and 0.3 to vulnerability. Yes, sorry, 0.3 to vulnerability and 0.7 to exposure, and this will give us the risk score in those particular district. So these are just the indicators we have for example, the vulnerability of population, settlement, infrastructure, forest, and crops. And the hazards, we have actually 11 hazards. You can see the hydroclimatic hazards and the geophysical hazards, and we mapped it for all the districts here. And it is the detail you can find out in the Atlas document. And the exposure, we have these only few items, because the most important thing to is have comprehensive data for all the districts. So as the data on population, settlement, crop, infrastructure, forest was very solid and available for all districts, we only measure these indicators, but we could add more in this system, the DRIP. We can add more in the exposure, like among roads. We can break down the infrastructure, different kinds of infrastructures, different kinds of roads, and also not just for it, we can have wetlands later on. And the vulnerabilities are here: poverty, education, gender, and livelihood, because also here we have good data available, but also later on we can also have more indicators, more breakdown of the poverty indicators. So this is as according to the BBS data, mostly from BBS, local government is in division, BADC, and BBS. And here's a matrix. So you all know that the risk is usually scored from a matrix scoring. And here we have the risk level from very low to very high. And so this is shown in our atlas and the maps. Very low is the green, very high is the red. Okay. And here is a very small is my last slide, is an example of a project. It's by the Water Development Board. So through the analysis of the DRIP, we will have the hazards and impact assessments and listing of counter assessment and cost of proposed countermeasures. And finally, the system, we can try to have a cost of countermeasure and how much it will be of the part of the total cost. And the list can be many, more than one, more than 5. So it has to be a comprehensive countermeasure list and also doable, whether it goes with the objective of the project. So the project developer will select the best group of countermeasures and integrate it in the project. So in conclusion, I just want to say that it is very important that when we talk about mainstreaming disaster in our development, because since the 7th 5-year plan, we have been trying to, 6th 5-year plan, we have tried to mainstream climate change, disaster in our development process. We need good tools. So DIA, disaster impact assessment, is that tool to have a risk-informed project. And so ultimately, at the end of the day, we will have a risk-informed development planning system. And but the only challenge that we need continuous updating. We need resources in the Planning Commission, and also government is working on that to have the resources and the manpower to maintain the DRIP and update the all the information through constant coordination with the different departments. And we are now in Bangladesh, we have very our knowledge on mapping, our analysis, it is growing day by day. So we using our own knowledge here to identify our own the risk level. So this is totally a custom made system fitting the Bangladesh context. So in a nutshell, this was all about the DIA and the DRIP and how we are mainstreaming disaster in our development planning. So with this, I would like to conclude, and thank you all for your patience hearing. So over to you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Norunar, for presently risk informal planning tool, including 6 steps and DRIP software. You all know the NRP project is working with public sector as presented by Dr. Nurul Nahar, and this project is working also with the private sector in response to disaster. A case study was done from this project on supply chain resilience in Bangladesh. Now I request Dr. Moinul Islam, Associate Professor, IoT, to present on supply chain resilience in Bangladesh, the case of RMG sector. Thank you, Dr. Moinul Islam.
Morning, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, thank
You
you.
share your screen.
Yes, sure. Can you see my screen?
Yeah, I can see.
Okay. Sorry.
Yeah. Great.
So, thank you for giving me this opportunity. So, the title of my presentation is Study on Supply Chain Resilience of the Ready-Made Garment Sector in Bangladesh. So, it was a project by the NRP, Program Division, Bangladesh Planning Commission. So, I would like to say that this is a multidisciplinary research work, and it included four experts. So, the first one was Dr. Mohammad Ziaul Haq Mamun, who is a professor of IBA. Now he is working as the Vice Chancellor of East West University. So he was our supply chain analyst. Then we have a disaster management specialist, Professor Rakib Hassan. He is from Buet. And then we have our trade analyst, Mr. Sakib Qureshi. And myself is Moinul Hussain. I am a professor at Islamic University of Technology. So in our presentation, we will look into these things. First, the objective of the project, then the scope that we cover, then the methodology and data that we use, and some of the major findings that we found, and the policy level recommendations that we made. And we can have a discussion on those issues at the end of the presentation. So from the big picture, the idea was to develop resilient strategies for the supply chain of the ready-made garment sector in Bangladesh, because like Bangladesh economy heavily depends on this sector. And we set some specific objectives for this project. So the first one was to review the existing supply chain system of the R&D sector, and then implication of natural disasters and climate change related risks on supply chain of this R&D sector, and impact of natural disaster on transportation network of the supply chain, because supply chain heavily depends on this transportation network, and the future of the R&D trades, like how much is it going to grow in course of time, and then formulate strategies to improve and strengthen the resilience of the R&D sector and its supply chain. And interestingly, the project took place during the COVID situation. So we also thought about many other dimensions, like these kinds of disasters that we never thought of. So those dimensions also in some way came into our suggestions. So whenever we are analyzing a scenario like this, we have to look into the best practice. So we identified some of the key elements of a resilient supply chain. The first one was the identification of key infrastructure and connectivity networks. And when we can identify that, the next step is to strategic investments in developing key infrastructure and connectivity networks. Then the second key element is authentic, updated, and reliable disaster data. And when you have that data, in light of this project, what we can do is we can do multimodal transportation network planning. And I'm very pleased to see that the DRIP website, when the previous presentation was going on, I was looking into that website. So this is something that is going to be really, really useful for us. And then the third element is like the free flow of usable information on coordinated decision making among key implementing agencies. As we move forward, we will see that whenever we are trying to come up with some policies, there are lots of regulations that we have in place. So like some of those need to have some more flexibility, and we will discuss about those issues as well. And regarding the scope of our project, actually we didn't consider the RMG sector of the whole Bangladesh. We selected a very specific corridor. It was from the sea and airports in Bangladesh to the RMG factories in Bangladesh, and then back to the sea and airports. And raw materials from the suppliers are coming to the RMG factories, and then the finished product is going back to the consumers through our seaports and airports. And for this project, we considered RMG factories mainly in the Dhaka belt. not in the Sylhet part or other parts, and some parts of the Chittagong belt was also considered. And regarding sea and airports in Bangladesh, we considered Shahjalal International Airport, and then Shah Amanat International Airport, and Chittagong Airport was our main focus for this project. And regarding the disaster, we can separate the disasters into three categories. They can be natural, they can be man-made, or they can be human-induced natural. And among the lists in our work, we considered flood, cyclone, and earthquake. And man-made disasters actually we didn't consider here. And we also considered waterlogging, landslides, and climate change. So this is the overall framework of our work. We started our work through a comprehensive literature review. And from that literature review, actually, we created an asset map. In that asset map, we had the RFG factories, and then we have our road network, rail network, and waterways. And also, we identified the land, sea, river, and airports. And after that, as we have seen in the last presentation also, we also identified the different risks and as well as the impact and likelihood of those risks. And then we incorporated the supply chain, the disaster data that I have already just told, and then the trade volume that we are going to experience in future. And from that, we created a transportation model. And when we input all those data into the transportation model, actually, we could simulate different kinds of disasters and see how the supply chain gets affected with different kinds of disasters. And then we came up with recommendations for natural disasters, disaster and impact reduction. So the data that we use is, I have told, like the map data, where we had all the location of the RMGs. Then we have the transportation network and also the different kinds of assets that we have on our transportation network. Then we did the literature review, as well as we interviewed many stakeholders and came up with the supply chain. And then our trade analyst, he came up with the demand of the R&D sector in future. And then the natural disaster expert identified different kinds of impacts and likelihoods of different kinds of natural disasters that we have just seen few slides back. And then we came up with the adaptation and mitigation strategies. So there is a website where actually the online portal mapped in Bangladesh, it actually identifies many of the RMG factories, mostly in Dhaka and Chittagong. But as it was in Google Map, for our analysis, we had to convert everything into GIS map. So we imported all their locations, as you can see here. And after that, we put the transportation network, mainly national highways, regional highways, and district highways, and also the railroads that we have, along with different ports into our map. And as you can see here, this is the map prepared for the analysis. And then we identified the supply chain. And here you can see from this diagram, the order flow, raw material flow, final product flow, and information flow all are listed here. And all the different components are here, the buying house, manufacturer, subcontractors. So this is the way the supply chain flows. So we now have the supply chain information, the network information, and the location of the RMG factories. And our trade analyst, he actually used the 2019 data as the base data, and for the 27 EU countries and the USA, with a 2% growth, 5% growth, and 10% growth per year, he calculated the projection of RMG export values in these markets. And as these are in monetary values, for our supply chain issue, we actually needed to convert it to TEU unit, like 20 feet equivalent containers that we have, because like that is the load that we are going to put on our transportation network and check the vulnerability of it. So this is that data converted from monetary value to TEU values. After that, our disaster management expert, from his calculation, he came up with the level of the kinds of disasters that we are going to that we may experience in this small study area, along with their magnitude. So from flood inundation, we can see that any flood level more than 3.6 meter may inundate the entire region between Dhaka and Chatpur. And with Chatpur and Chittagong, Dhaka-Chittagong corridor will not be severely affected, and the rail links will be less severely disrupted from flooding. So the rail has lower vulnerability, but the road network has vulnerability from Dhaka to Chatpur area due to flooding. And if you see about the waterlogging, you see like the red circles are identifying the areas where we will have severe waterlogging problems, and we can see several RMG factories are actually located in this area. And this blue box that you are seeing, this is actually identifying a part of our national highway in the Tongi area that is also susceptible to waterlogging. Actually, my university is near this area, and I regularly, during my commute to my office, I see these problems, especially during the rainy season. And waterlogging regarding Chittagong in Halishahar and Nasirabad area, these areas are vulnerable, and National Avenue N1, like CDA Avenue, a part of it is also susceptible to waterlogging. And then storm surge inundation, we can see that Dhaka-Chittagong highway from Barirhat to Cox's Bazar via Chittagong, this part is actually vulnerable if we have huge storm surge. And then Barirhat to Satkanya, this part of our railway line is also vulnerable to storm surge inundation. And then liquefaction, this topic is not being discussed that much till now, but it is very important, because if we have an earthquake, this can have a huge impact. So like we can see that a large number of factories in Dhaka are situated on liquefiable sites. So if there is an earthquake of high magnitude, we will have problems. And some proportion of our national highway and railway lines are also susceptible to liquefaction. And in case of Chattogram area, CETZ and Kalukhat industrial area, these are susceptible areas. And then rail line along the Karnafuli river is also vulnerable. And now landslide potential, we don't have that much issue as our network is not directly in the landslide prone area, but rail lines, like there are actually 3 rail stations that are near this area, and Nasirabad industrial area has actually falls into our high slope zone. And then the next work was like when we have the future volume of RMG sector in TEU unit, we needed to convert it back to truck unit, because like now we have the network, we have the future expected volume. Now we have to put everything on our network in truck unit. So we made a small model with historical RMG freight data and truck traffic data. We counted the vehicles, and then we converted the monetary and TEU values into trucks, number of trucks. So we found that the model was quite good. And after that, we used the demographic data, socioeconomic data, and land use data, and the transportation network to come up with a travel demand model on our national, regional, and district level highways. And once we have done that, we actually could identify, like you know, like this is the Dhaka-Chittagong highway. So where are the traffics coming from on this road from different parts of Bangladesh, and what extent of this traffic is coming from the RMG sector. And after that, what we identified is one major road route to transport the garment material to and from Chittagong. So this is making things extremely vulnerable. Then vulnerability or of road and rail network due to flooding, waterlogging, and cyclone, tidal surge, liquefaction, landslide, and earthquake. And we identified that underutilization of the existing river routes. And some of the suggestions that we have that will follow very soon, is like we suggested to distribute the logistics loads on available modes like road, railway, water, and air. All should be used. And development of suitable bypass and bypass road routes are also necessary. And if needed, we can also think about opting for dedicated cargo lanes for Dhaka here. And the scenarios that we propose that will be we have analyzed and you will see the results soon is like maximum use of inland waterways. Like we have analyzed the monthly demand for the R&D sector, and like the base demand, like the minimum demand that is there from January to December, we propose that that demand can actually be served by the waterways. And then we need to provide robust last mile connectivity to waterways and railway through roads, because from the factory to these railway stations and waterports, that connectivity has to be very strong. And to maintain a very good inland waterway, we need to increase the river depth, dredging for sedimentation, transit facilities on the way, and introduce fast moving vessels to reduce the lead time that we have now, and develop existing river ports and introduce new ones at strategic locations. And we have to improve the inland container handling and also the CNF support in the river ports, so that the river port takes care of everything. So when they are going directly to the Chittagong port, there is no other bureaucratic process in between. And when this sector will be encouraged, we also feel that private sector will start investing in water transport as well. Some of the inherent advantages that our water-based cargo transportation has in Bangladesh is like we are a riverine country, and water-based transportation is less vulnerable to disasters such as earthquake, landslide, as well as flooding, because these are like waterways don't get impacted with these things, right? And then more energy efficiency can actually be achieved if we are using the waterways as compared to road and railroad, because in transportation engineering there is a level, like if you are transporting from 0 to X kilometers, maybe the roads are the most efficient. From X to Y, then the railway comes in picture. And if it is more than that, then waterway becomes much cheaper. And Dhaka to Chittagong, the distance is actually falling into the category which suggests that waterways will be much more cost saving. And shifting R&D cargo to waterway will increase the efficiency of roads and rails as well, because you are moving a lot of traffic from road and rail, so they will operate at a faster speed. And importance of water transport will increase, and this will eventually address some of the major drawbacks that we have in the, related to water transport in Bangladesh. And here is a comparative picture actually. So like for the same amount of energy, if you are carrying 1 ton of cargo with road transport, you can go up to 100 kilometers, in rail 300 kilometers, but in water transport you can go up to 370 kilometers. So actually this shows that water transport can be very efficient for us. And in our simulation where we tested the vulnerability, we actually considered the ideal condition where 60% of our RMG freight will actually be catered by our water transport. You can see a link here. So this is the straight line because this is the water transport. And we saw that in that case, Dhaka-Chittagong highway actually can operate at its design speed, not much congestion, because we are moving a lot of truck traffic from it. And during disaster, actually, if you see, like if the Dhaka-Chittagong highway is failing, then actually we saw that the water transport needs to increase its cargo handling capacity by 20%, and then actually still the road network's speed will be something like 10 kilometers per hour. It will not come to a standstill condition during a very severe natural disaster that completely destroys at least some links of the Dhaka-Chittagong highway. So now let me come to the concluding part where we have our recommendations. First recommendation is develop riverine transportation system. So for that, we have to do the expansion of existing facilities and infrastructure to handle cargo in the containers, Then riverine ports should cover at least 60% of the RMG containers from Chittagong port and other seaports in the country, and keep the river route navigable throughout the year for carrying containerized cargo. And construction of facilities for jetties, loading, unloading docks, storage area, port, and customs facilities should also be built into these ports, and establish linkage with connecting roads, because the last mile connectivity is very important. If that is slow and inefficient, then our river ports will not operate properly. And obviously, we have to do environmental and social impacts, and then do a cost benefit comparative analysis with road and rail, because at this moment we can see that in most cases we are heavily investing in the road and rail infrastructure, but waterway many times remain neglected. But it can offer a lot of benefits, so we can actually do a comparative cost benefit analysis among these three competing modes and see like if waterway becomes financially feasible or not. Then the second one is adopt disaster resilient technical standards. So actually, we have to make sure that like all the infrastructure that we have, it can withstand level 5 floods and earthquake level, and also all the major road and rail network, they should be able to sustain recurring flood for 100-year return period. River ports should be designed to consider flood-induced riverbank erosion, and then in future industrial zones should consider all riverine and flash flood, including climate change effects. And we actually need a project on vulnerability assessment of the seismic liquefaction. As I have told, this is very much neglected at this moment. And a medium to high risk buildings which can block the major urban roads if collapsed should be assessed and retrofitted. And the third one is actually related to creating a buffer stock. This came into picture because of the COVID situation, and we saw like because of lack of buffer stock, we suffered a lot. So some regulatory boards can be established who identifies the requirements of different materials and how much should they be stocked and how this purchasing process can be done. Although this is, I know, a controversial area, but maybe we have to think about this. And the fourth one is like we have to include the disaster resilience consideration in our multimodal national transportation planning. And the fifth one is like as we have already seen, like this initiative is being taken. DRIP is that like all the consulting firms that are working and collecting data related to disaster, that should be submitted and shared by everybody. And then the sixth one is like we have to do a very in-depth feasibility among all the transportation modes, considering environment issue as well. And then the final one is programs to develop awareness of reduced vulnerability against any other shocks caused by exogenous factors such as COVID-19 pandemic. So with that, I'd like to conclude my presentation, and if you have some questions, I'll be happy to answer those. Thank you very much.
Thank you, thank you, Dr. Moinul Islam, for presenting the supply chain resilience in Bangladesh, the case of RMG sector. Now I request Dr. Muhammad Mahfuz Kubir, Research Director, Bangladesh Institute of International Strategy, to discuss on this informed public investment in Bangladesh, presented by Dr. Nurul Nahar and Dr. Mahfuz Kubir. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Chair of this session, and the presenters, especially Dr. Nurul Nahar and Dr. Moinul Hussain, and the participants of today's very important session. So first of all, I would like to congratulate the Programming Division of the Planning Commission for initiating such an important project. I think it's a continuation of all the, in fact, climate and disaster related, programming activities and the whole landscape of the planning process of Bangladesh, especially started from the in fact 6 5-year plan, and now we are implementing the 8 5-year plan, and also we have the document, very important document, which is Vision 2041. So, and keeping all this in mind, I think this is very important to discuss and to undertake this kind of projects. So actually I'll briefly in fact discuss some of the very important points. I think most of the things related to the risk informed public spending has been in fact incorporated in the presentation of Dr. Nur Nahar. So the technical support, so it's being provided by the programming division. So and the in fact the even though it's in fact initiated from the lens of the mostly from the lens of the public sector, because public sector is implementing lot of in fact infrastructural projects related to different sectors. It not only includes the health, education, or in fact other in fact communication network, in fact lot of roads, in fact highways and the district level roads, and also the in fact rural roads. So these are susceptible to in fact different disasters, multiple disasters, and climatic hazards. So and definitely it's very praiseworthy that the issue of gender has been included in the whole process. So I think in fact if it is possible, then definitely it should also include the disability issue, because in fact 10% of our population is disabled in any form. And also the age related issue, like I mean the elderly population, they should also be incorporated, their perspectives, like their benefits and their in fact losses, the impacts, these are also included. If that would be in fact appreciated. So this is number 2. Number 3 is the impact on the private sector. So definitely the infrastructure or any other things that are in fact implemented by the government, that has a positive impact on the private sector. And definitely there are a lot of studies, in fact the feasibility studies that are being that are conducted before initiating any of the projects. So in fact these are incorporated. But suddenly, as mentioned in the presentation, so there are in fact multiple single or multiple disasters. So there is a recovery plan, and during the plan, so there might be another disaster or 2 or 3 disasters. So that creates the situation very complex. And if we consider the expected return period, the recovery period, then there might be other issues during the recovery period. So and the issues of in fact exposure and vulnerability, the a very important equation that has been in fact, so it's IPCC's formula so used. So overall I would say that it is a very important initiative, and the things that the DRIP, so I missed that program in fact. So but as I can see, so it's so disaster and climate related information, so very important initiative, so it has been taken by the programming division. So now I would like to say that there should be so a kind of dynamic scenarios in the programming, or in fact doing any kind of exercise on the in fact risk informed planning of or initiating any project. So dynamic scenario in the sense that we have to in fact take into account the multiple disaster, not only once but also during the whole period of implementation of the project, and also lifetime of the project, any infrastructure project. The dynamic situation, the scenario of occurrence of future disaster, the present disaster and the future disaster, and what would be the possible impact and the extent, severity, and depth. So these should be incorporated. And also in the question of poverty, I think both the traditional, in fact the national poverty estimates by the plan by the BBS, so that is in fact already covered. But I think the human poverty should also be covered. So the in the human poverty, there in fact human dimensions are included. So that if that is in fact included, then I think there would be another dimension of this exercise. So with this, I would like to again thank. But before in fact finishing my impact statement, so I'd like to thank the team that conducted the supply chain resilience. So in that, in fact, I have seen the in fact brief of this, and in fact, from the technical perspective, I think it's good, but in the supply chain, the whole concentration is given on the transportation system. But I think there are other issues. I mean, at the in fact every points, like from the in fact the source of the raw materials and intermediate goods, and also the transportation, and also through the transportation to the factories, and from the factories to the buyers. So there are in fact different in fact the units of production and supply. So the whole thing should be considered, and the very important in fact recommendation is to use the internal waterways. I mean, the internal waterways, which is very important. It's not only resilient but also cost effective. So that is very important thing. So and if we in fact can reduce the costing of transportation through using the in fact waterways, then definitely it will have a kind of leverage on us. And also, if the resilience is in fact ensured through the using of waterways, then definitely we have double benefits. One is cost saving, and also through greater resilience. So I think that should be in fact incorporated. And there is a problem. So we have to have a multimodal transport kind of system. So from the factories, or from the origin to the waterways, and from waterways to the factory, and then vice versa, and from the factories to the buyers. So, but if we in fact undertake the multimodal kind of system, still it is better. So I think that should be pursued. So with this brief remark, I would like to stop here, and I would like to thank the Planning Commission for in fact giving me the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mohammad Mahfouz Korir, for your for valuable comments. On behalf of Program Division, we also look into your comments. Thank you. Now I request Mr. Tanvir to discuss on supply chain resilience in Bangladesh. The second presentation. I also request Mr. Tanvir to shortly, because we are now already 20 minutes left. So I request you to brief to short your discussion. Thank you. শোনা যাচ্ছে না, we cannot hear you. Mr. Tanvir, we cannot hear you. Any problem?
Maybe you have a microphone speaker to test korte hobe mone hoy.
Madam, may I come in?
একটু দেখেন তো।
I think the microphone is on for Mr. Tanvir.
ল্যাপটপে স্পিকার না মাইক্রোফোনটা একটু হয়তো টেস্ট করলে ইয়ে হবে।
From our end, it's looking that the microphone is on. You can kindly check his microphone and other. Also, madam, I would like to flag that we are running out of time. So if we can make the overall discussion in short minutes, then we can have the all the questions.
Yes, and we have Mizan sir. Are there any? Can we have a 5 minutes question answer? If anyone wants to give question.
Yes, it is a Mr. Tanvir, whether now I maybe I request Dr. Mizan to moderate the question and answer session. Whether it is okay, Nur Elahi? Thank you, Khandakar Sanshad. I'm here. So, dear participants, if you can raise your hand, you can introduce yourself and then ask comments or questions, or you can write questions to chat box and someone can help read out those chat box questions, comments. So, dear audience, you can raise your hand, introduce very shortly, and then some. I don't find any hand raised. No question regarding the two presentations.
These two presentations are so important for our national economy. I wonder why there is no question or comments.
Sir, I have only one question, not question, a suggestion, because in our second presentation, we heard the term liquefaction. So I was thinking if this could be an hazard in our future urban planning, because so far it is not in the list of the hazards. So if anyone can give some opinion, or Dr. Moinul can give opinion about the liquefaction concept. Thank you. Whether it should be a hazard, yeah.
Yes. So, Mr. Moinul, please come in.
Yes, thank you. Although I'm not a disaster expert, I'm a transportation expert, but I'm a civil engineer, so I have knowledge about it, basic knowledge. So actually, what happens in liquefaction is like if we have an earthquake, the whole soil can actually go down, and we have a lot of landfills in Dhaka city. So like this, and we have already shown that several of our areas are actually extremely vulnerable to liquefaction, and normally we don't think about this disaster a lot, and there has to be more intensive mapping of these kinds of disaster for the whole city, and where these kinds of R&D factories will be established. And then if we see that these kinds of hazards are very high, we can do some land improvement, soil improvement, we can take some soil improvement measures, and these things should be identified. Otherwise, like these disasters can actually cost us a lot of human life losses can happen. So a project like that can actually be introduced. So that is one of my suggestions.
Thank you. Thank you, Moinul Sahib, for your excellent presentation. I also learned a lot. So any more question, comments? If not, then
Now, one person, maybe Mr. Zakir, he raised hand.
yes. So please, Zakir Sahib, you please introduce yourself in 30 seconds and then ask your question or make comments. Short, very short.
Where is Zakir? Yes, Zakir Farmers Voice, Bangladesh.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. My name is Zakir. I represent a farming community at the local level in Bangladesh. Although Bangladesh is acknowledged globally as a global champion for disaster risk reduction from national to local level. However, in the field level, we see some problem with disaster risk reduction planning and also implementation. And for this reason, the risk from disasters at the local level sometimes is increasing the existing risks and also creating new risks. For example, the small breeze on our waterways is quite destructive for the locality and also the breeze itself. So my question is how we may have access to the drip tool as a local community, and we assess our vulnerabilities, and we can prepare ourselves for disaster risk reduction and making us resilient, and also to raise our voice to national and global level. My question goes maybe Honorable Nurul Nahar, please. Thank you. Back to you, sir.
Okay, thank you. It's a very important question. Basically, as I mentioned, the DI and DRIP was actually addressed for the government officials in our government departments. At least 58 ministries and their organizations are doing various kinds of infrastructure projects. So they will be given the ID and password, and they will they can download different kinds of data. But for this case, outside of the government, we need a government clearance in my planning commission, and to see how we can give this accessibility to other like your organization or other organization. And I'm sure our Minister of Planning will do that, but maybe after like a few not right now, but I think soon we need a government clearance on that. So, but we look forward to, we very welcome that you can access this DRIP and you utilize it in your projects. But at least for now, you can just have the look at the website we have given in my presentation. And you can look at the atlas. If you want an atlas, I can send you the atlas, the ADB atlas. You can download it, at least to locate your map, your project location, and understand the hazards in that area. So you can at least use the atlas in your projects. I would like to suggest that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Nurul Nahar. Any other question, comments? If not, then Khandakar Hassan, I will make just a few 2-3 minutes comments, and then I have to leave for another meeting.
You give comments.
Just comments for 2 minutes, and then I have to leave for another meeting. If you allow.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Actually, we are in the we are now completing the session actually within the 5 minutes actually. Thank you.
Just take 2 minutes. Excellent presentations by Dr. Nurul Nahar and Dr. Moinul. I have just only few comments. The risk-informed investment or disaster risk reduction is not politically popular, not just in Bangladesh but globally, because politicians always prefer ex-post recovery and rehabilitation and relief distribution, because that it can be seen on TV shows. For risk-informed investment, we need to invest more money for research, which is still not the case in Bangladesh. For example, if we look at the trust fund allocation, then only 1 or 2% has been invested in risk. In research and data generation. This is one thing. Mr. Moinul, your excellent presentation. If there is one just typo or something, flood or cyclones or this type are not natural disasters nowadays. They are very much man-made disasters, because climate change is man-made. This is one correction. And we need to also in research, as Dr. Mahfouz Kabir of BISS has mentioned, that why, for example, this riverine transport, water transport is not being developed in Bangladesh, which is absolutely makes economic sense. So with these little comments, I welcome these excellent papers, and we look forward to do joint works together. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sir, if I may come in.
Yes, Noor?
Sir, I found the question in the chat box. Notification itself is not a hazard, but it leads to hazard. I don't know. The question is from Iftekhar, Mr. Iftekhar.
Iftekhar to whom? The question is addressed to whom?
It's just a comment. It's not a question.
Oh, it's not a question. Then we don't need to respond. Okay. So you please continue. And I think we are almost at the end of the.
And now my whether Nurelahi now vote of thanks.
Sir.
Huh?
Yes, sir. But we can wrap up if it is.
Thank you.
And if you can check with Mr. Tanvi if he has any points to add, because we didn't connect him on the microphone.
Hello, Mr. Tanvir, whether you are connecting or not, no response here actually. Mr. Tanvir, maybe he is out of connection. Mustafizur Rahman. Now, Nurelai, maybe, maybe. Now, Nurelai, now I can wrap up this, yeah?
Yes, sir. Please, sir.
Okay, okay. And so, actually, good morning, huh? Good morning. Now I thank you all participants to present through through Zoom. We observed two presentation, two important and excellent presentation. One is the public sector and another is private sector, which is actually implemented the National Readiness Program Programming Division part. The presenter also briefly outlined the scenario of this two presentation. I do not repeat this. Actually, this you know that this project actually implemented technical assistance from UNDP program is a low cost actually project, but the activities also far done is very much on public sector regarding the preparation of tools and the deep software, and it will be implemented in the public investment projects, and we are also training more or less 300 participants, and we are also growing up some duties to conclude to sustain this program, because it is very much important and it will be continued after the project ends. On the other hand, the NRP project is implementing the private sector also, that was presented in the second presentation. You know, actually our investment more or less 24% is public sector and 76 or 77 in private investment. Private investment. So we are already through this project we cover also the private sector. You know that Bangladesh is moving towards the status of higher middle income country by 2031 and on way to become a developed nation by 2041. And climate change and disaster must be a critical challenge for Bangladesh on the path of towards 2041. And this informed development is must for sustaining the gain of past development initiatives and future development effects. I hope that the studies presented, you already informed here, will significantly contribute towards the risk informed development planning in the country. I'm also happy to be part of this new initiative and look for having a good success of this initiative. My cordial thanks and greetings to all concerned officials, NRP project team members who joined with us. Thank you very much for attending via Zoom link and with us. Thank you.